Staying with China, they're facing a new trade war too, once again with the United States. It all started with Joe Biden's announcement this week. He increased tariffs on Chinese imports. And some of those tariffs stood out, some of those announcements.
It has a history of only some 30 years. And certainly in the process, we will see many problems. So now we see the US government actually, they are in...
Let's not sugarcoat it. When the IMF speaks, the world listens, especially when it delivers what many might perceive as an indirect slap in the face to the United States. But here's the kicker. The International Monetary Fund has come out swinging, claiming that fears surrounding China's industrial subsidies are completely overblown. Yes, you heard that right, overblown. Meanwhile, Washington is drumming up fears about China's growing dominance in manufacturing, pointing fingers at Beijing for flooding global markets with cheap goods. So who's right? And who's playing politics? Stay with us until the end, because this debate is just getting started. Welcome back, folks. In this video, we're diving deep into a topic that's bound to rile up some feathers on both sides of the Pacific. We're talking about China's industrial policies, the US is growing alarm, and the IMF stepping in with what many are calling a subtle but sharp critique of American rhetoric. Is China the boogeyman that Washington is making it out to be, or are we witnessing a political smokescreen to distract from other economic issues? Stick around for the full breakdown, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more thought-provoking content. The big picture, IMF's response to China's criticism. To understand the current global economic landscape, we need to dissect a recent report from none other than the International Monetary Fund. And in this analysis, top IMF economists, including the esteemed Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas, essentially say, hold on, folks, all this panic about China's subsidies and industrial overcapacity, it's exaggerated now. That's not just a passive observation, that's a full-on rejection of a narrative that has dominated Washington's political discourse for years.
With respect to the tariffs, our view is that the U.S. Would be better served by maintaining open trade policies that have been vital to its economic performance. We also encourage the U.S. and China to work together toward a solution that addresses the underlying concerns that have exacerbated trade tensions between the two countries. And more broadly, we urge all countries to work within the multilateral framework to resolve their differences.
The U.S., particularly its White House and Treasury Department, has been pushing the idea that China's trade surplus is artificially bolstered by subsidies and that Beijing is dumping its excess products onto the rest of the world, wreaking havoc on local industries. The IMF's response: not so fast. According to them, the issue is much more complex and cannot be boiled down to simplistic accusations of unfair practices. Subsidies, minimal impact, major misconception. The IMF report highlights that China's subsidies are primarily directed towards industries like software, electric vehicles EVs, computer chips, and green technology. These sectors, while growing rapidly, account for only a small portion of China's overall exports. To put this in perspective, China produced nearly 9 million EVs last year, but only 1.2 million were exported, a figure that represents less than 1% of the country's total goods exports. Let that sink in. All this noise about China flooding global markets with subsidized products is hardly backed up by the numbers. This revelation should us pause. It suggests that much of the U.S. rhetoric about Chinese overcapacity, particularly in sectors like EVs, is more about political posturing than economic reality. If the actual export numbers are this small, then why is Washington so hell-bent on pointing fingers? The China shock narrative, a popular myth? There's also a significant ideological component here. Many in Washington across both political parties have framed China as a looming threat to American jobs and industry. This narrative, commonly referred to as the China shock, suggests that China's growing trade dominance will lead to mass layoffs, factory closures, and overall economic turmoil in other countries. Yet the IMF makes it clear that this fear is largely unfounded. In their words, concerns about a new China shock are incomplete at best and should be replaced with a macro view. What does that mean? Exactly. Essentially, the IMF argues that trade imbalances between the US and China are more the result of macroeconomic factors like differing savings rates and consumer spending patterns than China's industrial policies. Since the pandemic, China has seen a surge in savings, while the US has ramped up its spending. These economic fundamentals, the IMF contends, are far more responsible for the trade imbalance than any subsidies or industrial policies Beijing has enacted. A not-so-subtle critique of the US. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. The IMF didn't explicitly call out the United States, but their critique was clear as day for those paying attention. The IMF report takes a subtle dig at the kind of thinking that has dominated Washington for years. For both Democrats and Republicans, being tough on China has become a political staple, with both sides vying to show who can be the most antagonistic toward Beijing. Yet, according to the IMF, much of this is hot air. The IMF's critique goes beyond just industrial policy. In their annual report card, they gave a scathing review of U.S. deficits, debt levels, and trade policies. They warned that America's economic policies, particularly its ballooning deficit, could pose serious risks in the long run. So while the U.S. is busy pointing fingers at China, it might want to take a closer look at its own fiscal house. The global fallout, not just an American concern. But let's be clear, this isn't just an American issue. The influx of cheap Chinese goods has sparked backlash in other parts of the world too, from Europe to South America. Countries are concerned about the potential for Chinese overcapacity to disrupt their local industries. And China's meteoric rise in sectors like electric vehicles and green tech has only fueled those fears. However, the IMF's message is consistent. Rather than focusing on industrial policy, the fund urges China to rebalance its economy by boosting domestic demand. In other words, China needs to shift away from an export-driven growth model to one that's more focused on its own consumers. While China's exports have certainly caught the world's attention, the IMF believes that focusing on domestic reforms is the way forward for sustainable economic growth. China's economic realities, far from the boogeyman. So what's the takeaway from all this? The IMF's analysis suggests that China is far from the economic boogeyman it's made out to be. Yes, China has seen significant growth in high-tech industries like electric vehicles and green technology, but these sectors still make up a relatively small portion of its exports. And while there are legitimate concerns about trade imbalances and industrial policies, the real drivers of these imbalances are macroeconomic factors like savings rates and consumer demand, not some grand scheme of industrial domination.
中方不想同美方打贸易战，但我们绝不会坐视中国的利益受到损害。
So now it's a more total war, not only economic war. So we see the real danger. We even see the real danger for the two countries to be engaged in a physical war. Yeah.
In China's capacity. So in the past five years, if we didn't experience the pandemic, actually our export capacity will be stronger. Definitely, our exports of certain Chinese goods to the U.S. side have been affected, but generally, we haven't seen a drastic decline of Chinese export capacity.
Before I came to office, the story was about how the People's Republic of China was increasing its power and America was failing in the world. Not anymore. We made clear, and I made clear in my personal conversations, which have been many, with President Xi, that we seek competition, not conflict. But I will make no apologies that we're investing to make America stronger. Investing in American innovation and industries will define the future that China intends to be dominating.
The chip-making export restrictions could set the Chinese tech industry back a decade, according to some experts.
And China become almost totally unable to get strategic high tech and whatsoever from advanced countries, especially from the United States, but not only that, from all and advanced industrial countries.
Actually, U.S. is no longer the leading producer of semiconductors, but they want to build a circle, a closed circle, including U.S., Japan, China, Taiwan, and South Korea.
As the IMF's report suggests, it's time to shift the narrative. Instead of focusing on fear and suspicion, we need to take a more nuanced look at the global economy, one that considers the complex forces at play. China's rise is real, but the sky isn't falling. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a world where cooperation and competition must coexist and trade policies must reflect economic realities rather than political ambitions. If you found this discussion enlightening, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Is the US overreacting, or is China's dominance something we should all be worried about? Let's hear what you think. Stay tuned for more insights and provocative takes on the global economy.